who are questioning probably one of the hardest things to question, which is our culture's food system and the food that we're all raised from the time of little infants to think is natural and normal for us to be eating. How many of you, just so I have a sense of it, have actually have read the World Peace Diet? So I have a sense of okay, so a few of you have, but most of you haven't. Has anyone read? We have one other book that's just came out this year called Circles of Compassion. And probably most of you haven't read that, but I won't talk too much about this except just to mention in the beginning, if you're interested, if you like the World Peace Diet and you want to go a little deeper into the connection between our routine mistreatment of animals, the way we sort of live in our society, and other social justice issues, that's what this book is. I'm the editor of this. It's actually essays by 30 people who are experts in their fields of racism and sexism and heterosexism and ableism and classism and world hunger and injustice in general, and also on the efforts that we're making to have more equality and freedom in our society. And so these essays go more deeply into the connection between those issues and our food, animal agriculture, and what's called speciesism. Do you know what speciesism is? It's sort of like racism, but instead of just race, it's species. So the idea that humans are superior, and that the other animals are here for us to use, and they don't really matter because we're the ones that matter, and they don't matter. That idea. So there are certain stories in our society we're born into, right? We're raised in a particular society. We land somewhere on this planet when we're born, and I don't know if we have any choice in that matter. If we land here in Kansas, like Dorothy, or if we land maybe in Brazil, or Russia, or South America, or South Africa. We're heading to South Africa. I'm kind of excited about that. But wherever we are born, we're not born into a vacuum. We're born into a very rich cultural experience, right? So we're taught certain values. We have meals with these people that we're totally dependent on, and we, in many ways, imbibe. As children, we're like little sponges. We just soak up every little nuance of that society. Their language becomes my language. Their food becomes my food. And so what I want to talk about this evening is really the deep structure of our culture, to understand why we have the dilemmas and crises, the problems that we're dealing with, and also not just and sort of criticize the way things are in understanding, but actually the great news in all this is that we have a solution for the problem, right? We have an alternative that is enormously, empowering, liberating, as well as being delicious. So the underlying idea in this whole presentation, I guess, basically, is that all of us have been born into a society where it is taboo to talk about or even to think about the kinds of things we're going to be talking about and thinking about here this evening, which is essentially our relationship with animals, and specifically cows, pigs, chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, and fishes, the animals that we basically see as products in our refrigerators, and when we go to the restaurant, they're on the menu. And we don't really deal with them, typically relate to them as beings the way we do perhaps dogs. How many of you have a companion animal, or have had like a dog or a cat or a horse maybe? So yeah, a lot of you have. So those animals we really deal with as beings very often. They have personalities, we give them names, they have we're aware that they suffer, we try not to cause them unnecessary suffering, and so forth. So we develop a sense of appreciation for them as beings with interests, whose interests are as important to them as my interests are to me, who have the capacity to suffer psychologically and physically and socially. They don't want to be just abandoned or locked in a closet or have their bodies mutilated. But then we have these other animals, right, who we see as beef, and who we see as pork or ham or chicken thigh or drumstick, whatever. And so we objectify these beings, but are these beings any less sentient, or are their interests any less valuable to them than, say, my interests are to me? I think it's pretty obvious as we get to know them. How many of you have ever been to an animal, probably most of you have, an animal sanctuary or place where you see these animals? It's really great. If you ever have a chance to go to, a lot of you, yeah, that's kind of cool. and actually get to, rub a pig's belly or something like that. And get to really see these animals as beings. We see that they are like us on that fundamental basic level. And so the basic idea is that it's taboo to really think deeply about this, because if we did, we'd have to change the way we're living, and we human beings generally don't like to do that. We want to keep going the way we're going and keep doing what we want to do, but somehow we want to be able to have a society where peace and freedom and justice and equality are possible. And so the basic idea here that I'm presenting to our society is that if we want to eat cheeseburgers and ice cream cones and eggnog and any product from animals, peace and freedom and justice and equality and sustainability are absolutely not possible. They never will be for us. Absolutely, it's literally absurd to think that we can have for ourselves what we refuse to give to others. We want to have freedom, we want to have peace, but we're going to confine and abuse and mutilate and kill other sentient beings. And so what basically is that, we have these beings' welfare in our hands. They are vulnerable. These animals really are dependent. We make them dependent. We steal their sovereignty. We make them dependent on us. And then we do not treat them in the way we would want to be treated. So essentially we're raised in a society where, in many ways, our natural wisdom, our natural empathy and compassion and capacities are suppressed by being forced to participate in mealtime rituals where we not only watch adults eating the flesh of tortured animals, but we have to do it too. And so that basically shuts down a lot of our capacities and really explains in many ways why we live in a society where, even though we are essentially, I think, relatively intelligent species, we're doing things that are obviously profoundly unintelligent. Right? How we're cutting down rainforests at the rate of an acre per second. These are the lungs of the earth that we depend on, really, for a healthy society, for a healthy way of living, the oceans, the aquifers. Why are we attacking our nest, our home, with such enthusiasm, with such blind violence against ecosystems and other living systems, and we spend billions of dollars on weapons to kill other human beings and so forth. It's clearly something amiss here, obviously. I think if we came from outer space and landed here and walked around maybe for a few weeks and tried to figure out what was going on, and then radioed back up to the mothership and tried to explain what's happening on planet Earth, what we would probably say is, what's happening down here on planet Earth is there's this one species, and they are herding all the other animals, certain animals, and dominating. And so the planet is really on the edge of a complete breakdown of ecosystems and climate, and the genetic diversity is being compromised. We're losing about 100 to 200 species every single day to are going extinct because of the destruction of habitat by animal agriculture. So the basic hidden idea here, I guess, is that we're raised in a society that is essentially a herding culture. By that, and we don't usually think of ourselves as living in a herding society, but we think of ourselves as being more maybe computerized or industrialized or suburbanized, urbanized, and so forth. But we don't think of ourselves as just standing around herding animals all day. Basically, that's what we're doing. I mean, essentially, if you go into any building in our society, you'll go into the kitchen of that building, whether it's a home or an office or a hospital or a hotel or whatever, you'll find the flesh of animals. We're killing, just in the United States alone, 75 million animals every single day for food. So what we're talking about is a system that is vast, that was already operating when we were born, right? So we don't have to feel personally responsible. It's not like it's your fault that this is happening. We were born into this. And so this is what's happening. And the underlying idea is that we're living in a herding culture that's organized around owning certain animals as property for food, primarily, and other products, but primarily for food. And so in any herding culture, you have a system in place where people have got to be indoctrinated to participate in that, right? So we're taught from the time we're little infants that this is what we do. We eat certain animals. And what I want to emphasize tonight is the importance of making an effort to understand the consequences of this. What are the consequences to our society, to our earth, to our physical health, and more importantly, I think, to the inner landscape of our consciousness. How does it affect our emotions, our psychology, the spiritual dimension of life? What is the history of this? How did it all happen? And what is the future that we can perhaps create together? And the essential thing I want to emphasize here at the beginning is that even though some of what I'm saying here this evening seems like bad news, I'm going to be talking about some things that are not that great, really, that a lot of it is hidden from us. But the basic message, I would say, is enormously good news. Right? The basic message is, to me, is enormously positive. That we absolutely do have the power to transform our society and to do it quickly, and that it is vital. We live in critical times, so it's vital that we actually, each one of us, do what we can to understand this whole situation and make a positive contribution in some way. I think we all have ways of doing that. I love seeing what Diana's been working on all these years to kind of keep planting the seeds. And I know a lot of you have been doing something similar. So the basic idea is, and anthropologists understand this, that the primary way that any society passes its values from generation to generation is through rituals. Cultures have rituals. Every society has rituals. And the main, primary, fundamental ritual in any society are when people get together and eat food. Sitting down at a meal is a ritual at a very deep level. In fact, I remember when I was in Switzerland years ago and I was watching your mother back in Little Ducklings, I realized that what she was doing, essentially with her time and with these kids, was teaching them what food is and what food isn't, how to eat. And so as little kids, we're born into a society, whatever society it is, eating whatever food they're eating, and the deepest learning we get from our parents is about food and what to eat and how to eat. And so we understand anthropologically that looking deeply into our meals, we're looking essentially deeply into the underlying assumptions about the nature of reality of our society, of the connection, relationship between us and animals and ecosystems and each other and the whole universe. And so actually, if we really want to live a life of meaning, a life of authenticity, I think we all know this, then we have to understand ourselves. Remember at the Temple of Delphi, there was this saying, Ganathi Sutan, that means know thyself. So if we want to understand ourselves, make an effort to understand ourselves and who we are and what our place in the universe is, and we only have a short time here. We're only on this planet for 40, 50, 70, 80 years, maybe if you eat a lot of sprouts and really healthy, maybe 100 years, somebody 10 decades, right? It's not that long. I mean, so it goes by quickly. So we're here for a short time. What do we do with our time while we're here to make it worthwhile? Why are we here? What's our purpose? So to understand that, to understand ourselves, we need to understand our society, because in many ways we are products of whatever culture we're in. And as I've been explaining, and also it's very important to understand, if we want to understand our society, our culture, we have to understand the meals, the food system in our society. But the hard thing is that this is the one place where we're not allowed to look. Don't look. How many of you people are unusual. I know you don't probably eat every day at McDonald's. You're probably a little bit different. How many of you have made an effort to look behind the curtain of our culture's food system to see what's really going on behind the curtain? Some of you have. It's not very pleasant to look behind the curtain of our culture's food system, right? How many of you don't want to look there? It's kind of like, I don't want to look there.
How many people, what? What did you say?
How many people don't want to look behind? How many of you never raise your hands no matter what the question is? So, the thing is, it's kind of like, I love the word Kansas. Remember the Wizard of Oz? When Toto pulls the curtain back? It's like when you pull the curtain back, suddenly like Toto did, we suddenly, aha, that's what's going on here. Suddenly, oh, that's what it is. So the same thing, if we pull the curtain back of our food system, it explains a lot. But we have to develop a way of seeing. We have to learn to have an educated eye so we can really see what's behind the curtain. So the basic thing with what's behind the curtain is one huge thing, which is, I already mentioned it, we're killing 75 million animals every day for food. So that essential reality that we have, basically, we are living in a massive industrialized machine that kills and processes and feeds, breeds, feeds, kills, and eats animals. And there's no, what should I say, there's no ethical or emotional strife in a sense of it. There's no big headline in the New York Times, wow, tragedy, 75 million animals were killed yesterday just in the United States. What happened? God, this horrible thing happened. 75 million animals were killed. Everybody should be just mourning or having outrage or have some kind of investigation or, find who it was, who was the criminal that did all that. And it's just business as usual. It's relentless. It's routine. This is what we do. And so the good news in all of that is that this is something that we do, right? It's not some government program like a war in another country where they're just sending weapons and killing all these people and we can't stop it. This is something that we, the people, take out our wallets and we have our money, and this is how we vote. These are the votes that get counted. I think most of us wonder about the other votes. But these votes really do get counted, because when I vote for something, when I vote for meat or dairy or eggs, somewhere some animal is going to get stabbed and raped and killed because of my vote. So I'm causing, or I can vote for tofu or lentils or organic broccoli. We're voting continuously. So the votes that we make around food are amazingly powerful. This is the most powerful votes we could possibly have, because our food system really has the biggest impact on the environment, on our society, on our health, and also on our psyche, on our inner, the being, how we live in the world. So the essential thing to understand, first of all, as I launch into this whole talk, is that there's, in a sense, way more that I would like to say to you than I have time for. So I'm going to try to just not talk too fast and say what I can and not say a lot more. But in the World Peace Diet and the audiobook, there's much. It's a huge mandala of interconnected understandings that I would love to somehow give to you. But the audiobook, which is the entire thing, is 13 and a half hours long. I'm not going to make you sit here that long, so don't worry. A little, 1 hour maybe, and so you get 1/13 of it, but at least that's enough. So the basic idea is that this massive industrialized killing machine has an enormous impact. And I'll talk just briefly about the outer level of the impact, and then I want to talk about the inner level. So the outer level of the impact essentially is what it does to our Earth, right? To the ecosystems, what it does to our society, what it does to our health. So briefly, what it does to the ecosystems is it is the most devastating thing we're doing to the Earth itself. There's no human activity. I know fracking is really bad. I know, nuclear power is bad and all that, but animal agriculture, it's like way beyond anything else because it's so huge and so insidious in its devastation. And the main problem with animal agriculture really is that it's profoundly, almost ridiculously inefficient. In other words, it takes enormous amounts of grain fed to animals who convert that grain. And that grain, as you know, living here, it takes a lot of water, it takes a lot of land, it takes a lot of petroleum, creates a lot of pollution. And the animals convert this essentially to 4 things: saturated fat, cholesterol, acidifying animal protein, and enormous amounts of sewage, and methane and nitrous oxide, which are very destabilizing, devastating to our climactic stability and health. And so we're sucking aquifers dry, we are irrigating crops, genetically engineered corn, soy, alfalfa, and other crops that are fed to these animals. We're polluting streams, we're causing massive dead zones because of the chemical fertilizers that end up in the water, that end up flowing into the oceans. There's over 100 different major dead zones in the oceans now from animal agriculture, where because of hypoxia, which is they're just sucking out the oxygen in the water from nitrogen-rich runoff, nothing can live. And we have the pollution of our oceans from all the sewage, as well as the overfishing of the oceans, because the demand for fish, most people aren't aware of this, it is virtually almost infinite, because we're overfishing the oceans. According to just the most recent study just came out, and oceanographers are shocked. They're always shocked at how devastating our practices are. Just in the last 40 years, we've taken out over 50% of the ocean species, of the volume of fish are gone. They're just gone. My ancestors actually came over on the Mayflower and in 1620, and on one side of my family, and the other side of the planter in 1630, and they wrote in their journals how they thought that their ships were going to run aground on the thick schools of fish, on the cod, which were so thick they thought they couldn't even get through to get to the land, you know. And today the fish are gone. I mean, they're just wiped out. We've just basically overfished them to the point where the large fish species are virtually gone. And the reason the demand is so enormous is because we're not just feeding fish to people, we're feeding fish to animals, fish meal. So scientists discovered a long time ago that if you enrich the feed of cows and pigs and chickens with fish meal, they'll fatten up faster, they'll give more milk, they'll give more eggs. And so the situation is today that cows actually do eat more fish in the United States than human beings do. Have you seen cows jumping in a stream trying to catch fish? Now this is the absurdity of the whole system, is that it forces these animals into very toxic environments, hyper-confinement, eating food that's not appropriate for them, in order to unnaturally fatten them up, in order to unnaturally push them to give a lot more milk, because it's profitable. It's all about money, and the sicker the animals are, and the sicker they make the humans, which is also profitable for the pharmaceutical industry. So we have to understand that profits do not necessarily equate to our welfare, or to the welfare of our society, or to the welfare of our environment. And maybe it does equate to the welfare of the bank accounts of a few rich people, but not for us in general. If we want to have a healthy society for ourselves and a healthy planet for our children, we should really be questioning animal agriculture more than anything. And in fact, if you want to do just one thing that would by far most profoundly reduce our eco-footprint, it would be to go vegan, to move to a plant-based diet. We're talking about massive reduction in the amount of pollution and depletion of resources in water and oil and so forth. Not just 2 to 1 or 3 to 1, we're talking basically 15 to 20, even 30 to 1. In other words, according to the United Nations, for example, 30 people eating a plant-based diet use as much fresh water as one person eating a standard Western diet. 30 to 1, you know. The waste in the animal agriculture, I mean, day before yesterday, I was reading in the Huffington Post how the latest study is that with beef, 97% of the grain that is grown to feed a cow is wasted. Basically, when you're eating a burger, you're eating 3% of the grain. You know, and with chicken, I mean, with pork, it's 90% is wasted. With chicken and turkey, it's 80% is wasted. With animal agriculture, most of it is wasted. So we're growing most of the grain that we grow, we feed the animals, and the waste is also toxic. And then we're cutting down, like I said, a rainforest at an acre per second. The driving force behind that is to grow soybeans, which is not for humans, it's to feed these cows and pigs and chickens. In fact, farm fishes eat huge amounts of soy also, and that's then shipped off either to people in South America or China or North America or Europe. But it's a massive globalized system of devastation that is also destroying the habitat of wildlife and destroying, because really when you think about it, an acre per second of rainforest, we humans are cutting down an acre, every second an acre of rainforest. I mean, it's mind-boggling. That's what we're doing because we want to eat meat and dairy. And so when you cut down an acre of rainforest, it's not just cutting down some trees. We're talking about rich ecosystems that took millions of years that are full of birds and flowers and insects and food and all kinds of just life. And we're just destroying. How could we do that? How could to me, there's this wonderful saying by Krishnamurti. He said, it's not a good idea to be well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And that's the basic thing, to understand that. You know, when we begin to wake up, we begin to realize that our society is attacking the very fiber of the fabric of the interconnectedness of all living beings that we depend on to live. Attacking and causing species to go extinct at the rate of 100 to 200 every single day. And laying waste the very fiber of the planetary life support systems that we depend on. Why would we do that? Why would we allow that to happen? Why would we support it? It's because we don't know what we're doing. Everyone, see, the thing is, when we go out, when we leave here, we go out and we see people taking up their wallets and paying for the death and destruction and violence of animals and wildlife and ecosystems and feeding that to their children and feeding it to themselves. You have to realize there's only one reason why anyone does that. The one reason people do that is because they are following orders. They're just doing what they've been told to do. These orders get injected into us very early on, from when we're little infants, by our mothers and fathers and the ministers and the teachers and the Walmart ads, the McDonald's ads, the government, the corporations, the financial institutions, the doctors. They're all telling us this is what we're going to do to be healthy, right? And so that's why we do it. We just do it because we're doing what we've been told to do. So it's the community. It's understanding that the reason we are all products of our community. So in order to create a world where freedom and justice and peace and sustainability are possible, we have to somehow create an alternative to this community, an alternative community. I think that's what we're talking about here with this lecture this evening, and with like a local vegan meetup, to create alternative communities where we can share recipes that are based on plant-based sources of food that do not require killing animals, do not require feeding most of the food that we're growing to animals, that do not require cutting down rainforests, overfishing the oceans, polluting the land. And I would say it's very important as we move and make an understanding as we move to our plant-based diet, we're reducing our ecological footprint enormously. And I think at the same time it's good to be aware that as much as we can to make that organic. In other words, an organically grown plant-based diet is an enormously healthy foundation for health for ourselves and for our whole society, because if it's organic, we're not using pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and chemical fertilizers, which are devastating to wildlife. And then also I say not only organic, but as much as possible, a whole foods organic plant-based diet. In other words, foods that are, processed foods that, especially if they have chemicals and preservatives and artificial flavors and so forth, all that ends up in the ecosystem, plus it ends up in our ecosystem here, and it's not very healthy to have. So that's really the foundation. And my experience, I've actually now been a vegan for 35 years, and I think as we go along and we learn and we make an effort to understand the foundations of nutrition, we begin to see that this is amazingly delicious, the variety is endless, and the way that we can contribute to a future that's positive by questioning the official stories of our society that actually encourage us to be violent and to not care about ecosystems and to not care about wildlife. And the other thing I have to just mention, because I've noticed in the last 10 years or so, it's really become more and more of an issue, and that is that we can go to Whole Foods or other places and buy free-range meat, or grass-fed beef, and there's this idea that this is better, right? This is factory farming is bad, but this is good. Factory farming is terrible, obviously. You get these poor animals hyper-confined in these stinking sheds, or they never see the light of day. Very often they're so confined they can't even turn around, which very often driven completely insane by the hyper-confinement. They just bang their heads finally totally insane against the bars, or they peck each other's eyes out if they're stuck in these cages, and they're just driven into insanity, and we're eating insanity, right? We're eating these absolutely horribly abused animals. And so we have this so-called solution of having the animals in a little bit larger space. And typically it's in some kind of electrified fence. And so now with that happening, number one, it's not actually better. Studies show that you create even more methane and nitrous oxide with grass-fed beef. But in addition to that, it's important to understand that the war against wildlife is accelerated. Because when you have a factory farm system, nothing can get into those factory farms, right? They're locked. I can't get in there. Coyote is never going to get in there. But now that you have these animals in these enclosures, then maybe coyotes or prairie dogs or somebody will bother them. And so farmers and ranchers really hate that. And so we actually have a department, the Department of Wildlife Services is part of the USDA. And they spend millions of taxpayer dollars every year. And if you just go to their website, it's one of the most infuriating things that I ever do, and I do it sometimes. So just look at the list of animals that they killed last year, right? With our taxpayer dollars, we're talking about millions of animals, millions, hundreds of thousands of, 30, I can't remember, like 50,000 coyotes they killed. And badgers, thousands and thousands of otters, and something ridiculous, 20,000 beavers they killed in 1 year. and prairie dogs, and they kill literally hundreds of thousands or millions of birds, of starlings and cormorants and swans and geese and ducks and basically every single thing, skunks and opossums and bobcats and bears and opossums. I mean, any animal at all, you'll find they're killing a lot of them. So again, if we care at all about wildlife, about healthy ecosystems, about the animals themselves, then I think we begin to see that this is a system of enormous violence against animals. And then the other thing to look at is just our society too, because if we want to have a healthy society, then eating animal foods really is destroying them. I think we know we want to live in a healthy culture, but one of the big problems with animal agriculture is that because it's so inefficient, even though every year we grow enough grain to feed everyone, in fact, we grow enough grain to feed between 10 and 14 billion people, right? So we have about 7.3 billion people. We're growing enough grain every year to feed 10 to 12, maybe 14 billion people, depending on the estimates, but definitely more than the number of people we have, a lot more. And yet every year, right now, continuously, we have people starving. People just going hungry because they can't get anything to eat. And so how, again, if we're so intelligent, which I think on a deep level we are, would we abide by a system that's causing 30,000 children to starve to death every single day, where we have about 1 billion of our brothers and sisters going hungry and starving to death every year. So this is really something, I think, that is directly caused by animal agriculture, because essentially what's going on is we have a system where people that live in the industrialized nations of the world have more high-powered economies, so it's not difficult for us to drive up the price of grain on the world market and feed it to our imprisoned cows and pigs and chickens and eat their flesh and eat dairy products and eggs. And they're not going hungry. These animals are eating a lot. The factory farm fish are eating a lot. And yet, we find that there are people who are born into less industrialized nations where they don't have a high-powered economy. We've driven up the price of grain now on the world market out of their reach. They can't, we just outbid them for it because we have plenty of money. And so now they are starving. And also, they're being forced off their land in many cases by a variety of factors. Most of it's due to animal agriculture, either large corporations or governmental policies or global climate destabilization, which is causing drought. And so there's these food shortages. These people are going hungry. This is also the driving force behind war, our food shortages and the inequity where you have some people whose mothers are looking at their little babies dying in their arms of hunger, and not far away, there are other people who are eating so high off the hog that we're taking most of the grain, most of the land, most of the water, creating most of the pollution, and eating a very rich, animal-based way of living, and we're making these people starve to death. I mean, we're stealing basically from them. So this kind of injustice, it's well understood, will always lead to conflict. And of course, we have a huge weapons industry that just makes lots of money on all this conflict. It's just really good for their business. But if for us, again, as human beings, to have this kind of war and terrorism and violence and starvation, it just basically reduces the health of our society. And the irony, of course, in the whole thing is that while the people in the less industrialized nations are suffering from diseases of malnutrition and hunger, we have the people in the more industrialized nations, like the United States and Europe, suffering also from epidemics of diseases that ironically come from eating most of the grain. But we don't eat it directly, we feed it to animals. We use 3%, right? And we get the flesh of these animals, and so we suffer from the diseases that are caused by eating diets rich in saturated fat, cholesterol, and the devastating effects of animal protein. And so those are diseases like diabetes and obesity and osteoporosis and liver disease and kidney disease and breast, prostate, and colon cancer and diverticulitis we see a lot of, and of course strokes and heart disease and circulatory problems and dementia, Parkinson's, those kinds of diseases. These are all connected and very well understood to be related to this way of eating. And so we pay a high price for that. And the other thing we have to realize is that we have workers that have to do the work of killing these animals. And so it's very well understood by people who look deeply into the spiritual teachings of the world. Like I used to teach college courses in comparative religion. And it's really beautiful, I think, to see that the world religions all agree on the essential main point of our human relations. The main point is, I think if you summed it up maybe in one sentence, it would be something like, whatever you most want for yourself, give that to others. And this basic idea, if you want to be loved, be loving. If you want to be free, free others. If you want to have an abundant life and be generous. These basic teachings, when we hear them, something deep within us resonates, and we know that's true. And we can just feel it and we understand it. And another way of saying that is, whatever you sow, you will reap. And whatever you put out will come back. And so this is the situation we find with animal agriculture. It's such it's a system of violence on every level. It's a system of ugliness on every level. It's taking the beauty of this earth and the abundance of this earth and just using it for violence and for ugliness and taking animals and forcing them into imprisonment. And then we have other human beings who have to do this work. I don't know if any of you have been to stockyards, factory farms, slaughterhouses, and seen the horrible violence and misery that these animals endure, and to see what the people who do the work, they have to go home. So the workers in these places have the highest rates of work-related injuries. They're using electroshock things and sharp knives and so forth, and so they get hurt a lot. The animals are resisting all the time, and they're trying to protect themselves, and so they have to dominate them, stab them, kick them, and so forth, and they get hurt a lot. They also have the very high rates of drug addiction and alcoholism and spousal abuse and child abuse. Psychologists refer to the emotional and psychological condition as perpetrator-induced traumatic stress disorder. So they're, since they have to do nothing but stab animals all day or shock animals all day or something like that, they go back into when they leave work and either harm themselves or harm those in their communities because the work brings out the worst in them. So again, the idea is to just understand that animal agriculture, what it is essentially, is webs of trauma that radiate out into our society, to future generations, to ecosystems, to workers, to wildlife, to hungry people, and really to the cells in our own bodies. We eat this stuff, and we're eating terror and fear and despair and violence and waste. And the irony, again, in the whole thing is that when we're little kids and we're raised in this whole thing, and you go to any grocery store and look at the little baby food jars and you see turkey and veal and chicken and beef and cheese and so forth, to realize that we've all been told, we've all been conned, really, in a sense. We've all been fed this official story that's not true, that this is benign, that this is somehow, God gave us these animals, and this is great, this is how we live, this is how we get big and strong. And when we pull back the curtain, what we see is just the exact opposite of that. This is actually sickening us. It's shutting down our natural intelligence. It's creating a culture of war and violence and domination and oppression of women, of disease, of a never-ending strife. And in fact, following into its conclusion, we can see it already. Scientists are talking about really the inevitable extinction of human beings. And we won't even know why we went extinct. It's like, well, I don't know what happened. We were just eating burgers and we didn't figure it out. So we went extinct. You destroy the system that you depend on, then that's it, right? We're causing all these other species to go extinct. Well, as you sow, so shall you reap. We have to understand that if we want to make every other animal go extinct, then we're going to create the situation for the same thing to happen to us. So the idea here is to basically stop for a minute and question what we've been told, and question the official stories, and to really feel into it, to look and see that we live on a beautiful planet. There's so, Madeline and I are, I think, so fortunate to be able to travel and all over the world, but just to see forests and rivers and streams and flowers and birds and how animals celebrate their lives and love to live. Every animal loves to live. We all love to live. We all know that our life is a gift, and that it's precious to us. And it's precious because it's an opportunity for us to grow and to awaken and to have relationships and to learn and to help other people and to be creative and to contribute something. And this precious gift on this beautiful planet, and the other thing is that this planet is so abundant. We've been told this lie over and over again, there's not enough food. Some people are going to always be hungry. It's ridiculous. We're growing more than enough food to feed everybody, twice as much as they can possibly eat. If they just move to a planet, gosh, I couldn't believe how much grain you're growing here in Kansas and Oklahoma. Driving here, I thought we could feed everybody on this planet easily with all this grain. And yet they're feeding it to animals, and who convert it to these gigantic piles of manure. You have to cover it up with a plastic bag, and so it doesn't blow and make a whole lot of pollution everywhere. It's such an insane system, but it does work very well to concentrate a lot of wealth in the hands of a tiny minority. It works very well for that. But for everything else, why are we doing it? Why are we going along with a system? Why are we supporting a system that is in every way against our own self-interest? We're hypnotized by our society from the time we're infants. That's the thing to understand. It's something that it's closeted to us at a very deep level. The other thing is to just look at the health aspect of this, because the underlying idea of this whole thing is that, well, if you don't eat meat, where are you going to get your protein? If you don't drink dairy products and eat cheese, where are you going to get your calcium? If you don't eat eggs, where are you going to get, I don't know what, your sulfur bursts, whatever. I don't know. Anyway, so the idea is that somehow, we need this to be healthy, and yet all the research that's done, the meta-analysis of all the research is extremely clear that we do not have a physiology that requires animal foods to be healthy. And if you look at I have a whole chapter a little piece that goes into really looking carefully at our dentition, our teeth, our jaw, the fact we have a jaw that goes from side to side. We have saliva that only does one thing, it breaks down complex carbohydrates, right? And there's something reason for that. Cats have saliva that breaks down protein. We have saliva that breaks down complex carbohydrates. We have a digestive system that's very long and convoluted, that does not handle meat. It for sure doesn't handle dairy products. We don't have rennin like little calves have to break down casein, which is the main protein in milk. Casein is the driving force behind the whole bonanza of the medical industry for all the kids that have, appendicitis and tonsillitis and acne and colic and earaches and runny nose and sore throats and all that. That's casein. This is something we can't deal with. And type 1 diabetes, type 2, all these things are driven by dairy. We don't have, we're just not built to eat this stuff. So, our bodies are amazingly miraculous. They'll do the best they can with whatever we put in our mouths. And if we eat a typical American meal, they probably go, oh, here we go again. I hope they don't do that again, but I'll do my best, And so, but to realize that basically, if you boil it down to one sentence or something, it would be something like this. Just to understand that all of us, human beings, have been given the gift by the benevolent universe of a physical body that does not require any animal to suffer to get all the nutrients that we need to be healthy. But all of us have been born into a society where we've been forced, from the time we're little infants, to essentially participate in these mealtime rituals where we collectively take that gift we've been given from the benevolent universe and we just say no. And we throw that gift right back into her face or his face and we say, we're going to stab and kill animals anyway and eat their flesh. What in the heck are we doing? Why do we do that? We cause nothing but misery for them and for us and for the whole planet. And then we don't talk about it. Then we pretend, and if anybody wants to talk about it, we say, well, I like my bacon. like that's some kind of a reason, right? Because you like bacon. So this kind of amazing just shutting down of our natural capacities. And the beauty of the whole thing, I think, really, is to understand the fact that we don't need the animal foods to be healthy. How many of you, for example, have been to the Grand Canyon? Some of you probably, right? It's not that far away. So, anyway, so Grand Canyon, if you haven't been there, in Arizona, there's this big canyon. It's called the Grand Canyon. Yeah. Anyway, we were there a couple of years ago, and there's, on the South Rim, that's where most people come up from Flagstaff, there's this beautiful view. And I noticed as we spent a few days there that there's these signs everywhere that say, danger, danger, warning, warning, never attempt to hike all the way down to the Colorado River, which is at the bottom, and back up again in one day. That is not a day trip. If people die trying to do that, don't do that. And so I said to Madeline, I want to try that. So the next morning I took off and went down the Bright Angel Trail, down. Finally get down to the bottom, to the Colorado River. And there was a sign there by the river saying, no swimming. And, it's really hot when you get down there. And so I took a swim. And then turned around, I came back up, and I was actually back up on the South Rim before noon for lunch. And Madeline said, wow, that was fast. I said, well, it's just, these signs are not made for vegans. They're made for regular people who probably would die if they tried to eat them. But it's nothing to be proud of. It's just, if we're eating the kind of food we're supposed to be eating, then our arteries are not going to be all clogged with saturated fat and cholesterol and acidifying animal protein. We're going to be, we're going to be naturally a lot healthier. We're going to be in touch with the capacities that we have. And I think it's just in general, if you look at statistically, people who eat a whole foods, plant-based diet have far lower rates of the diseases that are filling up the medical establishments and hospitals in our society. And so, even if we were just the same health, but the fact that we could be even healthier, I think, essentially attests to the fact that we live in a benevolent universe. Essentially, I mean that we live in a system here where we can cooperate with each other. We can cooperate with nature. And one of the things I think, if you look at this historically, and I'll just say this briefly, there's a chapter in the Middle East that goes into this because I think it's important to understand this. That if we go back, we think, well, so how did this all happen? Like, what happened? Why are we doing this? If we go back 10,000 years, we find that in what is today Iraq, people, for the very first time on this planet, as far as we know, started to own certain animals for food. They started herding animals. There was wild sheep, and then wild goats, and then about 2,000 years later, wild cows. And so when that happened, essentially, what that was a revolution. And I believe this was the last revolution that ever happened on this planet as far as human. We talk about revolutions like, well, we had the scientific revolution, we had the industrial revolution. Those are not revolutions. You can kill any more animals faster than ever. It's the same basic society. But the herding revolution changed everything. And so basically it was a revolution of reductionism, of reducing beings to things. So it's well understood that before that, animals were recognized and honored and respected as mysterious and powerful cohabitants of this earth with us. But once we started as human beings owning them as property, they began gradually to become despised. You can't say anything worse than call someone a cow or a pig or a turkey or a chicken. So we reduced them, and then we also, about 3 or 4 things happened actually with the reduction of animals. And this was a very slow revolution. It did not happen overnight. It took thousands of years, but many, probably hundreds of generations, very gradually. People started owning animals. What happened was there arose a wealthy elite class that had never been before. A wealthy elite class that was wealthy and elite, powerful for one reason. They owned the capital. Capita is the ancient Sanskrit, the ancient Latin word for head, as in head of sheep and goats. Whoever owned the most head, the most capita, was the capital. And this was a means of producing wealth. It was livestock. Whoever owned the most was the richest, and they gradually accumulated power, and they became to control the religion and the government and the economy of the society. And they also invented 2 institutions that we still have with us today. One of them was when they saw another guy who had a lot of livestock, a lot of capital, a lot of sheep and goats. They would think, this is the first get-rich-quick scheme. I can go and just take them. Of course, they would give up without a fight. So for the very first time on this planet, we had war. The massive just battles, and it was for livestock. It was for wealth. It was for control of land for livestock. And this is well understood. I used to teach, Plato's Republic. He said, he talks very clearly about that. And Socrates says, well, and if we want to have livestock, then we'll have to go to war, won't we? Oh, yes, we will. So this is well understood. And so the very first word for war, actually, on this planet that we know of, is the ancient Sanskrit word gavya, which literally means the desire for more cows. That's the first word for war. So when the rich want to get richer, they go to war. Does that sound familiar somehow? Does that sound vaguely familiar? Well, that's the way it's been from the beginning. And then they also invented, right along with that, slavery. There had never been slavery before, but it's a very small step from doing something to an animal and then doing it to someone, to a human being. And so we had the arising of slavery because whoever lost the war, the animals became the property of the victor, and the losers of the war became the property of the victor. And you did not want to lose a war back then, because to be a slave was a fate worse than death in many ways. The women were just impregnated against their will, the same way they impregnated the animals against their will. They made a lot more slaves. And the men were castrated the same way they castrated the male animals, so they would be docile and easy to control. And we had the arising of a very violent, warlike, patriarchal culture because, again, men over thousands of years began to see the female animals that they were breeding all the time as they reduced them to mere breeders. And pretty soon that way of seeing went over to the women, and women's amazing power to give birth and bring new life and the capacities of women began to be subjugated by patriarchal male herders, and they looked at the women as mere breeders for their pleasure to give them children. And the very first science developed. Science was basically a way to dominate and exploit animals and nature and women. And this society spread. We have to understand that it spread throughout the eastern Mediterranean to the northern Mediterranean to Central Asia to Europe, came over to the Americas, and came over to Africa and spread to Asia. And this basic system, we were born into it. It's still going, and it's still spreading through Kentucky Fried Chicken, McDonald's, Burger King, Cargill, Monsanto, and ConAgra, and the huge pharmaceutical industry, and the governmental, I call it the military, industrial, medical, pharmaceutical, media complex. It's a vast complex. And it's very efficient at extracting resources, devastating ecosystems, enslaving animals, enslaving people, making profits on war, and really concentrating wealth in the hands of a tiny minority. It works great for that, you know. But we're seeing that we will not survive if we keep supporting that system. And the only way it goes on is because we eat meat and dairy. If you're going to eat meat and dairy and enslave animals, then you're going to be enslaved by the system. And yet people think that somehow it's a free choice to eat meat and dairy. That's my free choice. It's not a free choice. They think the cows who are eating meat and dairy, I mean, they don't get dairy anymore, poor cows. They're eating meat, they're eating fish, they're eating chicken, and they're feeding all these animals to each other. It's not a free choice for them. They're forced to eat in the interest of their exploiters for the cows to eat fish, right? It's not because it's in their interest. It's the same for us. Anyone who, when we leave here, we see people eating fish and chicken and beef and cheese, they're only doing it because it's in the interest of their exploiters that they do that. And they'll end up, you know, putting a lot of money into the hands of the pharmaceutical industry and getting sick and going off to war and doing all these other things. But the idea really to understand is that we have the choice. We have the choice. We do. We have the choice. This is such a beautiful thing. We can say, it looks like vegans are always saying no. Right? We can say, no, I'm not going to eat meat. I'm not going to eat dairy. I'm not going to wear wool and silk and leather. I'm not going to buy products that's on the We're always saying, people say, oh God, you vegan. You say no all the time. You say no to everything. But actually, all of those no's are really yeses, right? Every time we say no, we're really saying yes. We're saying yes to kindness, yes to being aware, yes to making connections, yes to being responsible for the ramifications of our actions, yes to creating a world of beauty and freedom and abundance for everyone. They're yeses. They're all yeses. It's a huge yes. It's a yes to life and love and caring and beauty and freedom and kindness and tenderness and mercy and joy and creativity. That's what it is. We say no to violence and murder, but yeah, we're saying yes all the time. And it's a joyful thing to do. Even though, you know, the irony, I guess, in the whole thing is if we go to our friends and family and we say to them, gosh, you know, I've been doing a little research, I've been doing a little internet, and I read the World Peace Diet, and I kind of did some studying on the internet, and I decided to go vegan. And our friends and family say, so you're a vegan now? Yeah, I'm a vegan. Then what do they say? Do they say, wow, you're a vegan? Man, I am so happy that you just made my day. I mean, think of it. You've become a vegan. That means you are a person who is contributing to making a better world. You're reducing the amount of suffering of animals and wildlife, and you're allowing more grain to feed hungry people. You're directly reducing the chance of war. You're helping to improve our economy, a healthier, more beautiful environment and a society, and you're going to be healthier yourself, and you're creating a world for the future. You're loving everything. I'm just delighted. Thank you so much. You're my inspiration. Thank you. Don't think you said. No, I mean, I will tell you. That's what they should be saying, if they had any sense at all. But I'm sure there are some angels in heaven who are definitely saying that. So really, I mean, it's great to go vegan. Even though what will probably happen is you say to your friends and family, well, I've gone vegan. They go, oh, well, now you're no fun. I mean, what am I going to do? We can't eat together anymore. They're all complaining, you know. But really, the underlying idea is this is an enormous victory. This is really a triumph on our planet for healing. And it's something we can actually, by going vegan, regain our self-confidence and our self-respect and our health on every level. Because I think it's important to understand that animal agriculture is not only devastating to the outer world, to our environment, to our society, to our health, but also to the inner landscape of our awareness, how it affects us. There's 3 or 4, I'll just talk about this briefly, but there's 3 or 4 primary characteristics of the mentality that's required of us if we're going to eat meat and dairy. And that's required of all of us because we're born in this society. We all went through the program. How many of you were born vegan? Anybody? Probably not. It's very rare. So if you're not born vegan, then you're born into a society where you're basically sitting around the table and going through these rituals where, first of all, every meal is a ritual of injecting into us a mentality of disconnectedness. You have to understand this. When we sit at the table and we're eating a typical meal, we're being injected with a mentality that is not in our best interest, a mentality of disconnectedness. Disconnecting what's on our plate from what it took to get it on our plate. Now when you think about it, I mean, when we're eating, you would think that that would be something that we would really want to know what it is, right? We want to be very aware, like I'm eating this. This is something that's going to become the actual cells of this body, this being that I am. This is important. Like, what am I eating? I should really know what the heck it is, right? But we don't know what it is. Most of it, we really have no idea for the most part, especially with animal foods. We don't want to make the connection. We'd rather not make the connection. I mean, I've talked to so many people over the years. I've been vegan for 35 years. If I say to people, would you like to know where your bacon comes from? They say, no. If I knew, I wouldn't enjoy it, and I want to enjoy it, so don't tell me, I just want to eat it. Do you believe that? I mean, they don't want to know. That's what this culture does to us. It disconnects us, these rituals, from, and the most important thing to understand is that the capacity to make connections is intelligence. That's what it is. For any, to make meaningful connections is intelligence. So if we reduce in the entire population everyone's capacity to make connections, then we are effectively reducing the intelligence of everyone in the society, reducing the intelligence of the society, and that is why we have a society where we can be cutting down the rainforest at an acre per second and totally destroying the oceans, and we just let it happen because our intelligence is so, our emotional intelligence and our cognitive intelligence. Emotional intelligence is compassion and empathy. That's reduced, and the cognitive intelligence, the actual capacity to make connections that are meaningful for us, is also reduced enormously. But that works very well if you are a member of the wealthy elite, because people whose intelligence is reduced will basically believe anything, right? Whatever the media tells you, well, we had this terrorist attack, we know who did it, I'll go kill them. You can believe this stuff. And we'll believe whatever the ads tell us to. We'll be obedient consumers. We'll just do what we're told. So what veganism is essentially is making connections, questioning the official stories, and not just going along with the official stories. Actually trusting something else, trusting our intuition, trusting our inner wisdom. So disconnectedness, also reductionism is another thing. Every meal is injecting us with a mentality where we learn to see a thing instead of a being. And so when we reduce beings to things, we essentially create a whole society based on turning everything into an object to be used for some kind of manipulation for ourselves. So this kind of competition and reduction of other beings comes back to ourselves. It's also a mentality of privilege and elitism, because the subtext of every meal is certain beings are inherently superior, other beings are inherently inferior, and it's fine for the superior beings to dominate and exploit the inferior beings. That's a mentality that causes incredible suffering. I mean, we have a situation in our society where we have a wealthy elite. I think it's something like 60 or 70 families own over half of the wealth of the entire planet. And that kind of inequity, we think that's terrible, right? People starving, going hungry, have no place to live, and yet other people have so much money they control everything. So, but if you want to eat meat and dairy, that's what you're going to have. You're going to have a society of inequality and a society of injustice. And it's also a society without freedom because the animals are enslaved, and Sophia would not let that happen. Sophia is this energy of wisdom and caring within all of us to protect life and nurture life and to create a society that's founded on justice and equality and love, essentially. So what I think we're seeing, though, which is I think enormously good news, is that there is an awakening in our planet today. The vegan movement is growing and gaining momentum every single day. Madeline and I, as we travel around North America and the world and Europe, we Asia, we've been to Korea, Taiwan, Australia, New Zealand, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and we're heading to Africa next month. But what we see is this universal worldwide awakening to the incredibly devastating effects of animal agriculture. The violence towards animals comes back. I call it the boomerang effect, right? Whatever we sow, we reap. And so even though the animals themselves cannot retaliate, they don't retaliate. You know, these poor pigs and cows and chickens, we're mutilating them, killing them, raping them on rape racks, stealing their children, drugging them. We're breaking every possible ethical standard, killing, stealing, lying, everything to these animals, and they don't retaliate, right? They don't rise up into some kind of a revolution or just take us all to court in a class action lawsuit and say, you guys are, they just suffer. They just suffer horribly at our hands. But what we don't realize, because we don't make connections, is that even though the animals do not retaliate, our violence towards the animals always retaliates. And it comes back as physical disease, psychological disease, as cultural disease, environmental disease, as depression, anxiety, panic, competition, war, violence, terrorism. All the stuff we're experiencing in our world is a direct result of our violence towards animals. And I have a whole chapter, a little piece, a subchapter that goes into how exactly what we're doing to animals comes back, how we sow seeds of obesity in them. I mean, they're basically sold by the pound. We have scientists working very hard to manipulate feeding cycles and lighting schedules and everything to make them as fat as possible, as quickly as possible. And so we sow seeds of obesity in them, and what do? We have this obesity epidemic. This keeps going up. We sow seeds of osteoporosis and cancer and everything else, and we get that happening. We sow seeds of breaking down their families, and we find that happens. We force drugs on them, and we find that happens. So the whole idea is to understand that the animals are in our hands, and if we would rise in our level of awareness so that we're worthy to be on this beautiful planet, to treat the other beings on this planet with kindness and respect, then we would be worthy of a society of abundance and joy and freedom and equality. There's nothing stopping us from creating a society of these characteristics. It's very well understood that we can feed everyone on this planet on a small, half of the land we're using for agriculture, probably even a lot less than that. We have the technology in agriculture to feed everyone on a fraction of the land, to allow the oceans to come back, the rivers to come back, the streams and forests and aquifers and the whole system of wildlife to thrive and feed everyone. So that's not an issue. We have plenty, we can do it. The whole thing is if we want to kill animals and eat them, then we not only devastate the outer world, this is the key to understand, it's devastating the outer world, but what it does, it's even more insidious, is it devastates the inner capacities we have to actually act in a way that's creative and intelligent. So animal agriculture destroys the world and destroys the inner capacities we have to heal the world. That's why veganism is the only way to heal this problem. It's like this. If we have, for example, say a crime committed publicly, where somebody perpetrator is, say, attacking, stealing, or beating someone. So there's three roles, right? There's the victim, the perpetrator, and then there's a bystander, a witness who's seeing this whole thing. Well, the perpetrator hopes that the bystander will just shut up and not say anything, right? And just let them do what they're doing, steal the money, and go. The victim is hoping that the bystander will interfere or do something to help stop this violence from happening. So in the situation we have today with animal agriculture, we essentially have a situation where there's victims and perpetrators and bystanders. Victims are literally billions of animals who are being stabbed and killed, imprisoned, tortured, mutilated, raped, and everything else for meat and dairy products and eggs. The perpetrators are literally millions, hundreds, actually billions of human beings who have been wounded by being forced to think that they have to stab all these animals or pay someone to do all this work. So we have these perpetrators and these victims locked in a cycle of violence. And this is the situation. We have this violence going on, people eating violence, getting sick, having war, and causing more violence. And the irony is that the only one who are bystanders in this situation are the vegans. Because anyone who's eating meat, dairy products, or eggs is part of their perpetrators, essentially. So we have people who are vegans are the only ones who are the actual bystanders in the situation, and we're the only ones that have any power to stop this whole thing. Because the actual meat eaters, the people who are eating meat, dairy products, and eggs, and buying those products, and the animals are locked in an absolute death spiral. They will kill, they will destroy everything. They're both victims, and and even the perpetrators are victims. And anyone eating meat and dairy has been abused as a child. You force them to eat that stuff. So so therefore, as vegans, somehow we've been able to free ourselves from that whole practice, and now really it's important for us to understand how to talk to the perpetrators in a way, or to communicate with them in some way to help heal that situation, to allow the animals not to be abused unnecessarily, and the earth and hungry people and the whole web of life here to be destroyed by this situation. So it's very important for us, whoever we are in our life, to do the best we can to move toward becoming a vegan, to no longer take out our wallets and pay for meat, dairy products, or eggs, or wool, or silk, or leather, or other products tested on animals, and then, but not stop there, to continue on to make an effort to be effective in our advocacy. So that means to really embrace, not just embrace, but to embody, I would say, what veganism is, which is kindness and caring and love. It's essentially love. That's what it is. Love that's not exclusive. Most people have love for a few people close to them, right? Veganism is love for the entire creation. It's love for all humanity and all living beings and all future generations. It's love for the earth. It's just love and caring for the whole creation. That's what it is. It's an infinite, all-inclusive love and caring for all living beings. And to make that the foundation of our lives, that we live our lives to care and give and bless the world as best we can. And that's also the only foundation for happiness. It's the only foundation for freedom. It's the only foundation for spiritual evolution of any kind. And it's really the only foundation for a healthy community. And so the thing to understand, I guess, underlying all of this is the power, two powers that we have. I would say number one is the power of introspection. The power of turning our mind within and feeling into ourselves and thinking, the way I'm living my life, and what I'm doing, is it my life, or am I just following orders? Am I just doing what I've been told to do by these voices in my head that were put there by my parents, or by the society, by the television ads? Because if we're just a product of our programming, we're not free. We're just a robot, just doing what we've been told. So number one is the power of introspection, of listening within, looking deeply, feeling deeply, and connecting with our own inner wisdom and living from that. And then number two is community, to create healthy communities, to somehow work together to create communities of kindness and caring and freedom, whether they're internet communities or a monthly meetup, or like we have Madeline and I, and Judy and Michael. We have this the worldwide prayer circle for animals, where every day at noon we have a little alarm goes off, beep beep beep, and then we all take a minute and we pray for the animals. And we have people, hundreds of people all over the world that are doing this. So that's a community, I think, in a way. It's a virtual community of people that just connect to just remember that we're part of this infinite, beautiful web of life here. And so the power of community, and like in my own life, just briefly, I remember when I was a little kid, I was raised in a community, and it was in Concord, Massachusetts, where we ate lots of meat, dairy products, and eggs, and I never questioned it because of my community. I knew I was eating the right thing. But when I was 7, I finally said to my mother, "So Mom, the kind of food we're eating, is this what everybody eats? Is this really the thing?" And she said, "Yeah, this is it. What we're eating is what human beings eat." And then I said, "Okay, thanks." And then my mother left. And then she came back a little later and she said, "Well, actually, there are vegetarians." I said, "What?" "What?" And she said, I never heard that word before. And she said, "There's vegetarians, but don't worry, you'll never meet one." She said, "I'm a lot older than you. I've never met one, And then she said, "I don't know where they get their protein." And so then I said, "Oh, okay, so these vegetarians are actually hypothetical people. They don't actually exist because they can't get enough protein. They're vegetarians, they're these special people that don't eat any protein. They just don't eat protein, I guess. That's right. They just somehow exist without protein." So that was it. My mother was totally right. I never heard the word again. That was the end of it. I remember that around that same time, I was helping my mother sometimes feed my little sister. My little sister was sitting in the high chair, and my mother said, you can, feed your little sister. So I was like the big brother, feed my little sister. I was kind of proud of myself, like how I could had this big responsibility to feed her. And of course, my mother said, but make sure that she eats her protein. That was the hardest thing. I would get the other food would go in, okay, but when I would bring the meat up there, she always spit it out. And so pretty soon I was trying to convince her, come on, you've got to eat your protein, And so I was kind of nervous because I thought, gosh, if I don't get her to eat it, she'll probably die of protein deficiency. It'll be my fault. So I make it like an airplane. Here comes the protein. Wrong. Come on, eat it. I was like forcing it down her throat. And so I'm so glad I can stand here before you today and say that my little sister, who I forced to eat meat when I was a little kid, is now a vegan. So glad to carry that in the grave. And also, just to add the rest of the story, my little sister's daughter is a vegan, and my little sister's daughter actually now has 2 little boys, and they're vegan from birth. And my mother's a vegan too. And Madeline's mother is 96 now, she's really up there, and she's a vegan. And our mothers, both of them, I think, really may not still be with us if they hadn't got vegan. My mother's the only one in her entire retirement community in Florida who was like some kind of a pharmaceutical drug of some kind. So I think, it's possible to change these communities. But I wanted to just mention, so after I left home, after I went away to college, and when I was 13, I participated. I was at this beautiful dairy in Vermont, went out for a couple of years, and in the summer camp, and we did lots of things, kayaking and that, but we also worked on the farm. And I remember they taught me how to catch a chicken, put her down, let's have my axe, cut her head off, and put her through the skull thing and eat the chickens. We did that. We killed animals as part of this. We killed cows. We would we'd put a gun or we'd kill them. Because on any dairy, even beautiful little organic dairy, even though a cow would normally live 25 years, on any dairy, organic or not, when they reach about 4 or 5 years old, they are worn out because they've been pregnant and lactating simultaneously, which breaks down the health of any female mammal very quickly. You can imagine for a woman, as soon as they're raped on this rape rack, after 9 months they give birth to a baby, and then as soon as they give birth to this baby, their milk starts flowing for the baby. If the baby is stolen, the baby never gets any milk. Then they started marketing the milk, but they impregnate her again on the rape rack. So she's pregnant and lactating, and they're pushing her. So instead of giving 10 pounds of milk a day like they normally would, they're giving 100 pounds of milk a day. This is like totally unsustainable. So by the time they reach 4 or 5 years old, they're still just basically infants. Just maybe teenagers, I guess. They're worn out and they're sent off to slaughter. And one of their babies, 1 out of the 4, will go to be a slave like the mother. The other 3 are killed. So dairy is an absolute rape and kill operation of horror, and I saw it a little bit when I was only 13 years old. I participated, but I couldn't begin to question it because I'd gone through at that point like 13 years of the most intense indoctrination a human being could possibly go through, and I knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that God put these animals on earth for us to eat. They don't have a soul like we do. They're totally inferior to us. They're just here for us to use. And if you don't eat them, you'll definitely die within 24 hours of protein deficiency. You just have to do it. This is the way it's set up. This is the way God wants it, And so I was so glad when I went away to college, I started to hear there were a few vegetarians, but I never met one. But then later, this was 1970s, and then in 1975, I graduated from college. I left home. I tried to get to California. I got as far as Tennessee. After about 3 or 4 months of walking with no money and just kind of on a spiritual pilgrimage, and I remember I ended up finally at this community in Tennessee called The Farm, and it was the largest hippie commune in the world back then, and about 900 people, and all 900 people was vegetarian. They ate no meat, and also they ate no dairy or eggs. So we would call it a vegan community today. No one heard of that word back in 1975, so they said, we're vegetarians. And they had about 200 kids that were vegan from birth, and they were thriving. And they were not dying of a protein deficiency or a calcium deficiency or anything else. And so I asked them, why are you guys doing this? And they said, well, there's 2 main reasons. One is most of the grain we're eating in the society we're feeding to animals, so people are starving. And we want to create a world of peace and put an end to hunger. And so we're vegetarian. We're eating low in the food chain. And the other reason was that he just told me about the terrible violence towards animals, just how the animals are mutilated, how their tails are docked, and their beaks are clipped off, and rape on rape racks, I mean, the whole thing, you know, the babies are stolen, this whole castration by anesthesia, this massive violence, and so it was kind of like Toto just pulling the curtain back, right? And I just saw that. I saw this horrific violence to animals, just clear as could be, like this whole huge hell realm, millions upon millions every day are just suffering unimaginable violence and misery, so we could eat their flesh and eat their secretions. And at the same time, I had this really wonderful example, and I would sit, you know, every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and eat meals of grains and vegetables. And so I had this example. So this is the key to understand. Community. The only reason anyone eats meat and dairy is because of the community we're in. And if we can, like in my case, I'm so grateful to that community called the farm for having an alternative example. Then I never ate meat again in my life. From that moment, that guy told me that, and I was eating with him. I had never eaten meat since that day in 1975. When he told me that, and I found out years later when I met Madeline that she went also in that same month and year anyway, never ate meat again in her life. You know, in 1970. So that was 40 years ago. And then about 5 years later, we managed. I managed to get out to California and discover the cruelty to dairy cows and hens. So I became a vegan. And a few years later, I went to Korea to become a Zen monk. And I found myself in a community when I was in South Korea of people who had been practicing what we would call veganism since the 1200s, right? Since 750 years. Everyone in this community ate no meat, no dairy, no eggs, no wool, no silk, no leather, no fur, no down, no animal foods, no animal anything. Even mosquitoes, you wouldn't just kill them, you sort of let them go carefully. And so the whole idea was, if you're living in a community where the whole emphasis is on ethical living, on kindness and caring, on spiritual maturity, then you understand that the prerequisite for any of that is ahimsa. Ahimsa is the ancient Sanskrit word that means non-violence. It means not harming others for my own benefit, not to kill or steal or lie or manipulate or violate others for myself. As soon as I do that, I'm not only harming them, I harm myself more than I can ever harm them. I actually shut down my own possibilities for freedom and joy and happiness, and will be guaranteed to live in a world of danger, and competition, and violence. That's why we create that world, because we're doing this. So I had this beautiful example. So when I came back to this country, I remember talking to Madeline about this, and this whole idea, like, gosh, year after I met Madeline later, and about this idea, the whole connection with animal agriculture. I mean, it was so liberating to realize that our violence towards animals is really, this is an obsolete food system we're born into. So the beautiful good news in all of this is that we human beings are not by nature violent and aggressive and abusive. We're just born into a society with an obsolete food system that essentially shuts down, through violence, our own natural intelligence and empathy, and creates, and we're put into a system based on animal agriculture, which brings out the worst in people, and is based on war and slavery, because that's what animal agriculture is, that's what slaving animals is. So now it's important for us to understand this and to consciously work to create an alternative. And so the whole idea, that's why I wrote the Wichita, is because people understand, there's books about the fact that eating animal foods is bad for the environment, bad for your health, and bad for the animals. But what this work does essentially is show the much bigger picture, the whole spiritual, psychological, cultural, anthropological, historical, sociological dimension of this. And I think once we begin to understand that, we begin to see that veganism is part of a much larger movement of awakening in our social life and in our individual lives. Like Gandhi said, he said there can never be any positive social transformation without positive personal transformation. So this is the underlying idea. And then the final thing I want to say, and then I wanted to show a short 6-minute little video, or actually a slideshow. The final thing I wanted to say is to really remember, there's a lot more actually in the Rope I'd like to share with you, but the main point is, number one, that this is an enormously positive message, like I said, that we can transform our lives and our society, and that there are stages in this journey, right? It's important to understand about the stages. Wherever you are in your life right now, just know you're in the right place. You're in the right, you're where you're supposed to be. And if you're not yet a vegetarian or anything, move toward becoming a vegetarian, or move toward, and then if you're a vegetarian, become a vegan if you can. If you're a vegan, though, don't think, oh, now I'm a vegan, I'm perfect, right? I can't do anything anymore, I'm a vegan, leave me alone, I'm perfect. That's perfect, I'm a vegan, I'm perfect. We have this idea that that's it, that's the highest, ultimate thing. And I think we have to understand that going vegan, it's great. I mean, it's not actually, don't eat meat, dairy, and eggs, don't buy, these products that cause suffering to animals. But to realize that that's just, in a sense, the very beginning stage of a whole big journey. And in fact, I'll just say this pretty clearly, because I think a lot of you are aware of this. Going vegan is I would say there's 3 primary stages. The first stage is not very easy. That's the beginning stage. Being a beginning vegan is a huge challenge. And it's difficult. It's mainly because of the veganist culture in a non-vegan culture. So there's a lot to learn. How do I make food that's healthy, that I like, that's going to be nutritious? What do I say to people when they say, well, plants have feelings too, or Jesus wants you to eat meat, or all these things? How do I deal with these social situations? There's all these challenges. It's very difficult. And so many people who go vegan, unfortunately, if we don't support them, I think that's why it's very important to have communities that will support, new vegans. They go back. Their doctor says, well, you're not getting enough beef. I need B12. You better eat some fish, or whatever they say. And we go, oh no, I guess I better do that. But so the whole idea is to as new vegans, to learn and to be, and so it's very good to mentor these people if we can. But then people, luckily, there's quite a few vegans that do move from stage 1 to stage 2. Now, stage 2, being a vegan, is actually not a whole lot better. Stage 2 is the stage I call the angry vegan. So now we've gone through the whole beginning thing, which is really difficult, and now we've gotten to stage 2. So now in stage 2, it's really great. Now we know how to make meals that are delicious, nutritious, and healthy. We know how to respond to people when they ask us these ridiculous questions, like, well, what about plants? Don't they have feelings too, or whatever. We know how to answer all these questions. We know we can respond. I have a whole chapter in the Wichita that talks about these different